A customer dropped off a 2009 Silverado with 312,000 miles on the odometer and told me the truck finally died. He wanted a quote for a replacement engine before he even let me look under the hood. I told him to give me 1 day first. What I found when I pulled that 5.3 liter apart was not what either of us expected, and it is the reason I am filming this teardown for you today instead of just handing him an invoice. This engine did not die from wear. It died from something almost nobody talks about, and once you see what 300,000 miles actually does to the internals of GM's most common V8, you are going to look at every high-mileage truck on a used lot completely differently. I have been rebuilding engines for over 2 decades, and I still was not ready for what the cylinder walls looked like when we got the heads off. Let us get into it. The truck came in with a knock that had gotten louder over about 2 weeks of driving. Then one morning, it just would not start. No crank, no click, nothing. The owner, a guy who drives for a regional delivery company, had put almost all of those 312,000 miles on himself since buying it new. He kept every service record, oil changes every 5,000 miles like clockwork, synthetic blend the whole way through, and one water pump replaced at 190,000 miles. Outside of that, the truck had never seen the inside of a shop for anything mechanical. That maintenance history is exactly why I wanted to tear this engine down instead of scrapping it. This was not a neglected engine. This was a textbook example of what the 5.3 liter Vortec is capable of when someone actually takes care of it, and I wanted to document every single component before we made any decisions. We pulled the engine Tuesday morning, 4 of us on the shop floor, and within 20 minutes it was on the stand. The first thing I checked was compression on all 8 cylinders before disassembly, because that number tells you almost everything before you even crack the pan. Every cylinder came back within 8 pounds per square inch of each other, which on a 300,000 mile engine is honestly better than some engines I have tested with 60,000 miles on them. That told me the rings were still sealing, the valves were still seating properly, and whatever killed this engine was not gradual wear catching up to it. Something specific happened, and specific problems are always more interesting than general wear. Once the heads came off, I want to be honest with you, I expected some ridge at the top of the cylinder bores. Every engine develops a small lip where the piston rings stop traveling at top dead center. What I found instead was cylinder walls that still had visible crosshatch pattern from the factory honing process. If you do not work on engines for a living, that crosshatch is the machining pattern cut into the cylinder wall when the engine is built, and it typically wears smooth within the first 50,000 to 80,000 miles under normal use. Seeing it survive to 312,000 miles told me 2 things immediately. The ring package General Motors used in this generation of 5.3 liter, the cast iron block with hyper-eutectic pistons, was doing exactly what it was engineered to do, and the oil film on those cylinder walls had never broken down enough to let metal-on-metal contact accelerate the wear. That is what a full synthetic blend and consistent 5,000-mile intervals actually buys you over the life of an engine, and most owners have no idea the difference is this dramatic. The bearings told an even more interesting story. We pulled the main bearing caps first, and the crankshaft journals underneath still had a mirror finish. No scoring, no discoloration from heat, no visible copper showing through the bearing material, which is the first sign a bearing is failing. The rod bearings looked nearly identical. On an engine with this many miles, I would expect to see at minimum some yellowing on the bearing surfaces from heat cycling, and instead these look close to what you would find pulling apart an engine with 80,000 miles on it. The oil pump, which is a common failure point people never think about until it is too late, still had full clearance within GM's factory specification when we measured it with a feeler gauge. None of this happens by accident. It happens because somebody changed the oil on schedule for 13 years straight and never let it go 8,000 or 9,000 miles past due the way most owners do. So if the internals were this healthy, what actually killed the engine? The answer was sitting right there once we pulled the timing cover. The timing chain had stretched enough that it jumped a tooth on the camshaft sprocket, and that threw valve timing off just enough to send a couple of valves into contact with the pistons on one bank. That is what caused the knock, and that is what stopped the engine from starting the following morning. This is actually one of the most well-documented weak points on this generation of 5.3-liter, and it is worth explaining why it happens, because it has nothing to do with how well the owner maintained the engine and everything to do with a design decision General Motors made to save weight and cost. The factory timing chain guides on these engines are made from a nylon composite material instead of solid metal, and that composite degrades over time from constant exposure to hot oil. Once the guide starts breaking down, the chain gets slightly more slack with every mile, and eventually that slack lets the chain jump. On most engines, this starts becoming a real risk somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 miles, and this owner had pushed well past that window before it finally caught up with him. The frustrating part is that this is a completely preventable failure. A timing chain and guide kit for this engine runs about $400 to $600 in parts, and the labor to do the job properly with the front cover off is another 3 to 5 hours, depending on the shop. Compare that to what he was about to pay for a full engine replacement, and you can see why I wanted him to let me look first instead of assuming the worst. I want to walk you through the rest of what we found, because it changes how I think about buying any high-mileage GM truck. The oil pan had a small amount of sludge buildup near the pickup tube, which is completely normal and expected on any engine with this many miles, even one maintained perfectly. It was not enough to restrict oil flow, and it did not affect anything we measured. The piston skirts showed almost no scuffing, which again points back to that consistent oil change interval doing its job, protecting the cylinder walls. We also pulled the oil pump gears and measured them against specification, and they came back within factory tolerance, which surprised me because oil pump wear is usually one of the first things to show up on an engine with this kind of mileage. The valve seats, when we pulled the heads apart completely, showed almost no recession, meaning the valves were still seating exactly where they were machined to seat from the factory. On an engine that runs 300,000 miles of heat cycling, that is genuinely impressive, and it tells you GM got the metallurgy right on these heads, even if they cut a corner on the timing chain guides. Here is the part that I think matters most for anyone shopping for a used truck right now. This engine, outside of one specific and well-known weak point, was essentially healthy at 312,000 miles. The block, the crankshaft, the rods, the pistons, the valve train, all of it was within specification or close enough to it that a rebuild was not even the conversation. We are putting in a new timing chain, guides, and tensioner, resurfacing the heads since they were already off, replacing all the gaskets while we are in there, and this truck is going back on the road for a fraction of what a used replacement engine would have cost. That is the story most people never hear about these engines, because the ones that fail from the timing chain issue usually get towed straight to a shop that quotes a full replacement without ever pulling it apart to see what is actually salvageable. If a shop does not physically tear an engine down, they cannot tell you what killed it, and they definitely cannot tell you what is still good. If you are watching this because you are looking at a used truck with a 5.3-liter and high mileage, here is what I would actually check before you buy. Ask for maintenance records and look specifically for oil change consistency, because that single factor predicted almost everything we found inside this engine. Start the truck cold and listen carefully for the first 10 seconds before the oil pressure builds, because a rattling or knocking sound during that window is often the first sign of timing chain slack. If you can, have a shop pull a sample of the oil and check it under magnification indication for metal content, since that will show timing chain wear or bearing wear before it becomes a catastrophic failure you can hear. And do not assume high mileage means the engine is close to done. What we found on this teardown is that a 5.3 liter maintained properly can have internals that look almost new at over 300,000 miles, and the parts most likely to fail are cheap, well documented, and preventable if you catch them early. This is why I keep telling people that mileage alone tells you almost nothing about the actual condition of an engine. This truck had over 3 times the mileage most people consider the end of an engine's useful life, and the crankshaft, rods, pistons, and cylinder walls were in better shape than plenty of engines I have opened up with a fraction of the miles. The only thing that took this engine down was one known weak point that costs a few $100s to fix if you catch it in time. If this kind of teardown content is useful to you, subscribe, because I am opening up more high-mileage engines like this every month to show you exactly what survives and what does not. And if you own a 5.3-liter GM truck right now, go listen to it cold. Start tomorrow morning before you do anything else. That 10 seconds of sound could save you an engine. Take care of your truck, stay ahead of the maintenance, and it will run a lot longer than you think. I will see you in the next one.